So continuing on my series of top 3 variations for each lift, we're going to be moving into bench press now. And one of the things I really discussed in detail during the squat video was the benefit of variations in general, and I really dive deep into each one. But just to kind of give you a recap of what the 4 main reasons are, when I'm programming variations, it's because either 1, they help to self-limit the movement in some manner by able to use a little bit less load due to making the movement more difficult. 2, they help to self-correct movement patterns. 3, they help to manage workload and fatigue, and that goes a lot back to the self-limiting aspect of them possibly being a little less stressful in general, inducing less fatigue, and so in some manner we can implement those to kind of manage workload and fatigue a little bit better throughout a microcycle or mesocycle or training block. And number 4, some variations with some athletes, we see a very direct transfer. If that variation increases in strength, we see the actual competition movement increase in strength. So some variations tend to have a very direct transfer of training to the actual competition movements. So like I said, I cover those in a lot more detail in the squat video, so if you haven't watched that one and you want to get more ideas of why I program variations, make sure to watch that kind of first 5 minutes of the squat video preceding this. But getting into the top 3 bench press variations, what I'm going to do throughout this video is 1, go through the top 3 variations that I program when it comes to the bench press, but I'm going to make sure to describe why I like them, what I really think they do and what the benefits are of them. I'm going to make sure to show how to do them correctly so that you're getting the most out of them by performing them right. I'm going to go break down who I think needs them in regards to specific lifter examples and movement faults or some type of scenarios of where I think these variations best fit, as well as when I don't think they fit, who these variations are not for when I don't use them. And then lastly, for each variation, I'm going to sum it up by really going kind of the when and how I program these and how these kind of fit into someone's training. And lastly, going through these top 3 variations, they're in a specific order. They're in an order of most applicable to, I don't want to say least applicable, but maybe a little bit more circumstantial. Whereas the first one I'm going to go through, which is going to be tempo bench press, can pretty much be used by most people and see benefit from. The second one's going to be Larson, which is pretty universally applicable as well, but there's definitely some circumstances where we might not use it. And the last one being close grip work, which I very much like, but there's definitely instances where we don't use it. So I'm going to go in the order too of kind of what I think is most applicable and I use most often, and kind of work down from there. And with these variations, I'm going to be kind of alluding to a certain technique that I coach, but within this video, I'm not going to dive deep into that. I'm very much going to allude to some of the things I'm going to kind of cue and kind of approach in the forms of form and technique with bench press. But if you're wanting more information on that and you haven't watched my in-depth bench technique video or my leg drive video, I'm going to make sure to link those in the description box below and definitely reference those as well after this video to kind of understanding kind of when I'm talking about how we can improve things, what the improvements are leading to in regards to kind of what I'm coaching technique-wise. So first up on my list, on my top 3 favorite bench variations is the tempo bench press. And as I mentioned, this one's at the top because I think it's the most universally applicable, and I think the vast majority of lifters can benefit from a tempo bench press. So why do I like them? I think probably one of the biggest benefits of tempo bench press is it really forces someone to use constant leg drive. If you watch my bench technique videos, I'm usually an advocate of constant tension on leg drive, not kind of this heave and sink method or reduce leg tension and drive as you press, but more so this constant leg drive that's creating this horizontal pressure to then elevate the rib cage and help to create position, stability, and tension throughout the movement from head to toe. So with tempo bench press, it really forces you to do this. If you don't do it, you're going to get punished from it. It's almost going to be fairly uncomfortable to do a tempo bench press if you aren't staying on your legs throughout the entirety of the movement. So if someone's struggling with leg drive and keeping that constant tension, if I do a tempo bench press, that usually fixes it up pretty quick. And because of this leg drive, it helps to improve our control at the pause and touch point. When it comes back to kind of losing leg drive, people tend to come down, they're good, and at the last minute, they kind of let their legs tension come off, they dump the bar, that bar kind of dumps onto their chest, it sinks in, maybe it bounces. Having that tempo and creating that constant leg drive effect and maintaining that position usually results in improving the stability of that pause. And when it comes to powerlifting, we need to not only pause our bench press, but we need to have an efficient pause so that when it comes competition time, we're not just sitting there with the bar bouncing on our chest, not getting a press command. We want to get a press command as soon as possible. So we need that bar to come to a complete stop, rest there, so we can get as fast of a press command as possible before then initiating the actual concentric. And with any tempo movement, tempo squat, tempo deadlift, tempo bench, it's slowing down the movement to allow us to increase our awareness of position. So when we're doing a tempo bench press, it helps to be able to kind of get an increased awareness of what our bar path, touch point, and elbows are doing. If we're tucking our elbows, if our bar path is straying from the optimal line that we're trying to be within, it's going to be able to, we're able to feel that. We're going to be able to get better immediate context and feedback from bar position and what we're doing if we're actually slowly descending throughout the movement and can feel those positions as we descend. Which in return helps us to process cues maybe we're working on through the movement. So maybe someone's really working on feeling that bar on the outer side of their palm. As they tempo, they can really feel that coming down and be a bit more mindful of that cue. Maybe we're thinking a bit more about reaching the chest of the bar. Since we're slowing that down, we can think about that more. Anytime we tempo, it kind of helps to ingrain cueing that we're trying to learn better, because we have more time to process and think about that and be able to maybe focus on that where we're doing our normal bench, or maybe we're doing more maximal load. We don't have time to cue that. We just have to bench. We just gotta have to do it. It's too fast. It's too heavy to be able to kind of roll through these different cueing patterns in the middle of a movement. And going along with the pause control, the bar path, and all these things, I tend to bias a little bit more towards a soft touch bench press style. It's not that I don't have people who kind of do more of a sink and heave. I would tend to bias more towards that. And that kind of goes along with the constant leg drive, the higher arch, wider bench. It all kind of goes with the same kind of process or thought process, is that usually in that manner, we're going to be into more of a soft touch bench, because the sink and heave requires usually letting off leg drive, losing thoracic position, and being more of a thrusting style of leg drive versus a constant style of leg drive. So if someone's really struggling with kind of being able to soft touch, and they're still wanting to sink in to their chest and heave a little bit, even though they're trying to be able to build a bit more on the soft touch side and constant leg drive, the tempo is going to really kind of help with that, because it's going to really slow it down all the way down so we can get right to the chest, just touch the chest, soft touch there, and press from it. And one thing I found with tempo bench is it tends to help a little bit with people who have side-to-side asymmetry. Someone who maybe is biased crooked a little bit. We see some bar tilt. We see some changes in elbow position or wrist position, any of those things. And it all goes back to slowing down the movement, and we can feel this more. When we're having this bar tilt as we're going down, and we can feel maybe biasing into one side and more pressure on that left side because we're somehow over tucking or over retracting or whatever we may be doing, we're going to be able to feel that more. So someone who might have asymmetry side to side, we're seeing some bar tilt, we're seeing the bar not touching center and off bias, we're seeing instability side to side, anything like that is going to help. And as well as kind of it helps, like even though the obliques aren't contracting and working in the same way maybe they are with stabilizing the rib cage in the squat and the deadlift, because in the squat and the deadlift we're trying to maintain more of a neutrality and not letting our rib cage flare. In the bench press we are letting our rib cage flare. And actually in one of my form technique videos I really kind of covered this, is what kind of happens if we lose kind of context with our obliques. If we just kind of let them just completely go and they're just kind of like, instance, floating, I call them like a floating rib cage, we start to lose control of this connection between our rib cage and our lower body. So it does help in some manner to have this kind of context of just obliques being able to control us laterally with that side-to-side stability, which a lot of times goes back to leg drive, and leg drive kind of leaking up and creating this irradiation and tension effect all the way from the feet up to the obliques. But with tempo bench, we can feel that a little bit more. If we are very noticeably unstable on one side, we have a floating rib cage because we're not controlling with like a left side oblique, we're gonna be able to feel that as we're doing the tempo, because it's gonna punish us more. It's gonna give us more negative feedback during the movement than it will during a regular competition bench press. And then lastly, with a tempo bench, what I've found is it's fairly easy to cross back over to a regular competition bench. For tempo squats, I kind of alluded to this if you watch my top 3 squat variations when I talk about pause squats. I sometimes find that people have a really hard time transitioning from a tempo squat to a regular squat. It becomes too different. And while I'm going to always argue that tempo equals control, not that, and then control is in a tempo squat versus your regular squat. There's no differentiation there. There's always going to be control. It's just the descent speed. With squatting, that just seems a little bit harder to kind of mesh together. It seems that people, they tend to either one tempo or they tend to start descending fast, and those things tend to start to kind of be hard to kind of bring together into one. Definitely possible, just a little bit harder. With bench press, I don't find it as much. I find most people can tempo bench press and then immediately transition to a competition bench press, maybe the next block, and have a fairly seamless effort into it. And it mainly comes back to the fact that they're usually gonna find a little bit more benefit in controlling that bar position, especially if they're using this constant leg drive, this elevated rib cage, wider grip bench press. They're usually gonna find that actually this increased control, and maybe not tempoing 3 seconds, but maybe now it's like a 1.5 second descent versus a 0.5 second descent. They usually carry that over, and they actually find that they're stronger in that way because they're able to maintain position as they're reaching that pause, not letting themselves sink, not letting off a leg drive, not dumping the bar, being able to maintain the position they want, and then they find because of that, they're stronger. So I just find in general, tempo bench press seems to transition to a regular bench press better than some other tempo variations with the other lifts. So getting into how to tempo bench press correctly, it shouldn't be drastically different than what you're doing on your regular bench press. It's just gonna be reinforcing the good habits you should be having. So one of the biggest things is just making sure, like any tempo movement, you're actually tempoing it. If it's a 3-second tempo, make sure it's actually a 3-second tempo, and make sure that descent speed is consistent throughout. Way too often what we see with people when they do tempo squats or tempo bench is they'll have a 3-second descent, but what it will look like is 3, 2, 1, press. And the majority of that tempo comes from the top, which in reality, that's actually where we don't need it. If we had to go one way or the other, it would be better to tempo it at the bottom than at the top in regards to kind of what we're trying to correct here. So more importantly and even better, is just have a consistent descent speed. So if it's a 3-second tempo, make sure that tempo is the same consistent speed throughout, all the way to the chest, and then press. I never did increase that speed. I never tried to get the bar to bring it to my chest, which I've talked about in my bench technique videos. I don't like to think about bringing the bar to me. I like to think about bringing the chest to the bar, and then it meets. Like, I'm not trying to get it there. It just eventually happens through that consistent descent speed as it goes down. And as I've already kind of discussed with the tempo bench press, we're most likely going to be doing a soft touch approach. It doesn't mean the bar can't rest on your chest, but we're not letting it sink into us. We're not losing thoracic position. We're not going from extension and then flexing. We're following more of a soft touch approach, because what usually happens if we don't do that is we're going to dump it. And that usually coincides with the change in descent speed. This is what you're going to see. You're going to see someone have that constant leg drive. They're going to be good, good, good. And then at the bottom, they increase the speed, they dump it, they let off leg drive, and they let the bar then rest into their chest too much, versus kind of more of that soft touch approach, staying stable and truly pause, and then pressing from there. And then lastly, make sure you have that same consistent leg drive throughout. If not, almost trying to increase it as you kind of get the bar into your chest to kind of drive that rib cage up to the bar. What we don't want is to be changing our leg drive throughout the movement, because then that's going to affect our ability to control that tempo and very well that tempo speed. So consistent leg drive throughout the movement from the time you descend all the way through the time you lock out. So who could benefit from tempo bench press? As I alluded to, it's number 1 on my list because everyone could. The number 1 reason I'm probably going to program that is to help improve someone's leg drive and make that more consistent throughout the entirety of the movement. And I would say very few people are true masters of leg drive. There are some, but even the best still sometimes need some kind of skill practice with this, just to maintain the ability to kind of drive with those legs to the extent they need to, which I'm actually going to touch at the end a little bit on an example of kind of programming this in the sense of an advanced lifter and just minimal exposure, but some exposure just to kind of maintain that skill. And going with that, someone who would really need it, and who I definitely would program something like a tempo bench press for, is someone who has a heavy sink style bench press that we want to get away from that. And we want to get more into a soft style bench press, constant leg drive and controlling that movement, and being more stable with that rib cage position as we reach that pause. And usually those lifters coincide with the same people who are dumping the bar at higher intensities. And by dumping, I mean you're in this bar path that's consistent until the very end, when all of a sudden you change angles. Instead of touching at the lower sternum like the bar angle was coming to, you then kind of drop down and go to the lower sternum. Usually that kind of coincides with someone who's kind of more of a hink and sieve style bencher and can't control all the way to the chest. And so that's naturally going to help someone get a more consistent touch point. One issue with a lot of benchers is their touch point's inconsistent. Especially as they get to higher intensities, we see that start changing. And so doing a tempo bench press can kind of start to habitualize where that touch point is due to the control aspect, but also just being able to feel it, being able to feel kind of what that position and stability should feel like at the bottom at that pause, and be able to replicate that when they come back to their normal bench press. And going with the control and kind of the technique improvement, if someone's really struggling with kind of where their elbows are tracking, they're over tucking, they're not keeping their elbows in line with under the bar to kind of stack those joints, they're inconsistent again with their bar path, or maybe they're struggling, like I said, I'm a big proponent of making sure to feel that bar on the outside lower palm versus having it sitting back into that hand. Doesn't mean you can't have your wrist extended, but still the main contact point should be that outside lower palm, so we stack that over the wrist joint. If someone's really struggling with that, we're just going to slow down the movement so they can really feel that and focus on that cueing and position as they descend through the bench. And if someone's having asymmetry in their bench, and we're seeing some differences side to side, as I kind of mentioned, tempo can be a great thing for that, because again, it just slows down the movement. We can be able to program that to be able to kind of get them better contextual feedback of what each side is doing, so they can kind of reference that. And while there's cues we can do, or little technique things we can do to kind of improve asymmetries, one of the best things is just to get things to feel even. Like, feel is a big part of a lot of lifters, and some people do better with directional cueing, some people do better with their general body awareness, some people just have to feel it. So if we can just put them in a position to feel that asymmetry and then find better balance, a lot of times that's going to translate better than any cue we can possibly give them. But if we do have a cue that we think will click, it's very likely within a tempo bench, because it's going to slow it down, it's going to be able to click better. So if you have a cue with someone that you know is possibly the right one, it's leading in the right direction, but it's just not fully clicking, possibly then program a tempo bench, include that same thought process of the cue you're trying to help translate, and then there's a good chance it's going to help to kind of slow down the movement, allow them to process that cue better throughout the movement, to then be able to carry that learning over into the actual competition bench press. And then lastly, something you can do if someone is rushing their pauses, maybe it's not even an issue that they're sinking, they're heaving, they're not using leg drive, everything's good, they just constantly rush their pauses, add a tempo in. Tempo slows everything down. You're all of a sudden not in a rush because there's nowhere to go, because you have to go super slow coming down. And I'm not going to say that they won't possibly rush the pause, but there's also a good chance that pause is going to be more legal because they come to a more solid, stable stop, and they're going to, in a sense, in a competition setting, get a faster press command. But more likely and more often than not, because you're including that tempo, there's no rush to be able to press back up. You're already slowed down, so many times you can cue them to then make sure to increase that pause length a little bit to a more competition standard, and that's going to feel more natural since they're already kind of slowing things down in the first place. There's times not to use this variation though, and not to tempo bench press, and probably the number one time is if you are a heavy sink and heave bencher and that's what you're doing, and that works for you. I mean, a perfect example of someone I probably wouldn't program tempo bench press for is someone like Jonathan Keiko. Hard to argue with him when I think he's been at 540, 550, 93 kilos, something crazy. I know he hasn't done that in a meet yet. I think it's like 513 or 520 in a meet, but he does a fairly strong heave and sink style bench and it works for him. It would be silly to correct that at this point because he's become very strong in that manner. So he's someone in the aspect of a lifter that we see that really excels at that style of benching that we wouldn't program a tempo for, because that would start to kind of change their movement patterns and change kind of how they're biasing with their pause. Or kind of in a similar manner, let's say someone is a soft touch bencher, they have a really good leg drive, they have really good technique, nothing's wrong. It's probably not someone I'm going to program too much tempo bench pressing for. They're solid in their technique. The tempo bench press is a very close relative to the regular competition bench press. It's not very different in the sense of specificity. The only thing is we're slowing down that descent, and the benefit of slowing down that descent, as I talked about, is in large part the control and the leg drive aspect. So if they're not displaying those issues, they may not need it, or as I'm going to kind of allude to in kind of how to program, maybe they just need very, very low exposure to it versus someone who needs more of that technique improvement, needs a more high exposure and frequency to tempo bench pressing. In regards to sometimes I probably wouldn't program it, more on the programming end versus the technical side, is if you've done tempo bench press, it can be exhausting. I mean, 3 reps feels like 8 reps. So if our main priority is hypertrophy or we're trying to do higher reps, I tend to not program tempo bench press over 5 to 6 reps. Usually 5 reps or lower. And that's partially because 1, the time under tension becomes excessive and people really start to break down and form on it. But 2, the point of it is not to, I mean, I'm not trying to program time under tension for hypertrophy purposes. We're programming a tempo to slow down the movement, increase leg drive and control, and the other benefits I mentioned. So if I'm going for more of a hypertrophy aspect within a training block, I'm probably gonna not go towards a tempo bench press. There's definitely some other things that will accomplish that goal better. And then lastly, I'm gonna touch on this a little bit more when I talk about Larson press, which is the next one. But if someone's really suffering from some type of knee tendinopathy or knee issues, you'd be surprised how much that can kind of stem a little bit from bench press as well, especially with this constant leg drive style of bench press where we're constantly isometrically driving into extension with the knee. And so if someone's really struggling with knee tendinopathy, this is probably a movement I'm not going to do because it's increasing that time and under tension with kind of that knee extension, as well as since it's promoting even for most people, even stronger leg drive, it's going to exacerbate that. So, like I said, I'm going to touch on the little knee tendinopathy thing more on Larson bench because I think that's a very under talked about thing in regards to knee pain, is how bench press can kind of play a role in that. So wrapping up tempo bench press, let's look at really kind of how and when I would program this. So for the most part, I could program this really anytime. There's very much been times that I program this all the way leading up to a meet, but maybe with a little less frequency. Maybe as we get to a meet, we need to comp bench more. But if I feel like a lifter really needs that continued kind of skill practice and reaffirmation of positioning with tempo bench press, I might be leaving that in a secondary or tertiary day just to make sure we maintain that skill as we lead into a meet and increase comp specificity. But otherwise, this is a movement that maybe outside of kind of those hypertrophy blocks that I could see myself programming pretty much any time within a trainer's lifting year. As I did say though, I would typically program these from anywhere from heavy singles all the way up to reps of 5 and 6. And I definitely program heavy singles. Like this is a movement we can definitely go heavy on, and there's a purpose and benefit to going heavier on. So, but like I said, I don't really see much purpose of going above 5 or 6s unless you want your athletes to hate you. But also for the reason that even if we see a desired training effect. The fact of the matter is tempos over 5 or 6 on bench, typically we're going to see some form degradation. We're going to start seeing those tempos increase in speed. We're not going to see the training effect we want from them if we're probably going higher reps than that. And so with tempo, as I mentioned, a lot of this is to be able to obviously improve our competition bench. And I've seen a very good transition from tempo to competition bench. I have many lifters, and this has happened one too many times for it just to be like a coincidence or just an individual thing. I've seen this with many people, is that we will pretty often come back to a block or two where we program a lot of tempo bench press. We'll program 2 to 3 days of it just to really hammer in that control and position. After maybe 2 blocks of that, we'll transition back into competition bench, and then boom, they PR. And I think that is not necessarily as much some type of magical increase in strength as much as we have refined their technique, and that is at a very high level at this point, coming off of that tempo bench pressing blocks, and we're able to maintain that through the competition bench pressing blocks, and then PR because of not only strength, but in large part because we're able to maintain that skill we learned with that improved position and be able to transmit our full potential and force into our 1 rep max. And then lastly, I've kind of mentioned this a couple times, that maybe you just need very low exposure to it. And someone who does is Sean Noriega. This is actually from his own program. This isn't something that I brought into when I worked with him, but something he had already been doing prior, is he just does 1 tempo bench single a week. And that's the extent of the tempo he needs. But he needs it, and he really likes it because it just helps, it gives him enough to kind of reaffirm the context, position, and technique he needs for the rest of the week. And as long as he just has that 1 exposure, that's enough for him. So that kind of goes in the general programming, is looking at novice to advanced. Most likely novice, if tempo bench press is a variation we're going to use, they're going to need more exposure to it. As we get more advanced and more refined in our lifting, we might not need very much exposure. We may just need 1 block where we do tempo bench press in a large macro cycle. Maybe we only need 1 day, maybe we only need 1 lift, 1 single, such as Sean. So I think a lot of these variations, I'm going to talk about this on close grip bench, which is going to be the last one, is that going from novice to intermediate, the benefit and the exposure tends to change. So next up on my top 3 bench variations is the Larson bench press. So looking at why I like them, probably the number 1 reason and overriding reason is it's self-limiting. As I mentioned kind of in the introduction, variations can be self-limiting, and in that role can help to, 1, decrease intensity and things like that, but also really help with kind of managing fatigue and workload in some manner. So dependent on the training effect we're looking for, the training block, the stimulus we're going for, we can definitely have Larson being able to sprinkle in there somehow to be able to just kind of manage fatigue a little bit better. So I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more when I get kind of the when and how I program these. So looking at more the technical side of why I like them, I mean, the very obvious thing about Larson is it takes away leg drive. We can no longer rely on leg drive to provide stability or really anything in regards to kind of helping to tension and stabilize our bench press. So, and one thing, especially with like a hink and a sieve style bencher, is it takes away their ability to kind of heave and drive the bar up. So talking about tempo bench press, trying to get away from that hink and sieve style, the Larson really punishes that. And so it's another way to kind of get people kind of biasing towards more of this control and soft touch and maintaining that rib cage position is by doing a Larson bench where they're going to get punished if they let it sink, because they don't really have any way to drive out of that other than just jamming down their mid back to kind of use their chest and extension to kind of propel that bar up off their chest. And with that, something I see sometimes with lifters is obviously you have the people with leg drive that they drive and their butt comes straight up. But there are some lifters who have fairly good leg drive until they finally get to kind of like that maximal intensity. Like maybe they're doing a set of 5 and it's all good until that last rep. And on that last rep, what you're going to see is that as they come down and pause, they're going to start pressing and they're good. And then about right here, they get stuck. And then they start elevating and get this more decline angle to get through, which is a little bit different. That's not a matter of like they have constant leg drive, they have the correct leg drive. It's just that when they get to that sticking point, they don't grind through it. They start to change their body angle to kind of cheat the system, which obviously come competition time is going to get red lighted for their butt coming up. So with a Larson, they can't do that. They're going to have to stay because they don't have any way to change their body angle. So it's going to really force them to have to fight through that sticking point in their normal angle of pressing, which in the grand scheme, hopefully is going to strengthen that so that when they go back to their competition bench, they're able to grind through that out without having to want to change their angle of their body. And so because of taking out the legs, you're going to have to learn a little bit more how to control your torso and your rib cage with your upper body muscles. And while I'm a big proponent of using leg drive to do that, there still needs to be some aspect of kind of those posterior chain muscles and the lats and spinal erectors and traps and all those kind of things, and really helping to stabilize into that thoracic extension. And so we do need that. We don't want to just completely rely on the legs only. We need to have some upper body tension to kind of effectively maintain those positions and strengthen those too. So a Larson really kind of teaches us how to do that. It kind of separates it. It takes out the legs and it really simplifies the bench press. In the sense of, let's say someone they're good at leg driving, but there's some upper body issues. Maybe their bar path, maybe it's their rib cage stability and kind of positioning. Anything like that, we can kind of, even though since leg drive is a fairly difficult concept for some people and they have to over cue and think about that, if they're really struggling with like an upper body issue, we can just bias towards the Larson, take away the leg drive so we don't have to worry about that right now, and then be able to focus more on cueing of particular issues that we're having more with kind of what the upper body is doing. Fix those before then going back to a regular competition bench and reintroducing leg drive again. And obviously without legs, it's going to increase the stability demand. Our main stability on the bench press comes from our leg drive, and especially with how we position our legs, that's not only front to back, but also lateral. So when we're taking that out, on Larson, it's increasing stability demands, which is partially why it's self-limiting. Now, do we want to be acting like we're on a Bosu ball? No, but as I kind of mentioned with the tempo bench, there is an aspect of kind of this lateral oblique control. Like we don't want to lose that. We want to have this control from our obliques through our serratus, through our shoulders, and all the way through our transitioning force into the bar. And so that kind of lateral stability kind of cues that more. Like if we just kind of have this floating rib cage and we don't have any control with our core muscles, we're going to definitely get punished for that on a Larson. So it's going to really kind of just, it's going to involuntarily make us start to be a bit more stable with our core. And then hopefully once we are kind of practice that and learn that, we can transition that to our competition bench press without really having to overthink or over cue it. And so talking about kind of that rib cage control and really trying to make sure we maintain this elevation with the rib cage, since we don't have leg drive to do that, it's really going to punish someone when they're chest collapse. And I kind of alluded to kind of like if you sink and try and heave, it's going to be very hard since you don't have any legs to kind of drive and propel you out of that position. So when you do a Larson, if someone's not good at maintaining and controlling that pause and they try and sink too much or they dump, they're going to get punished for that. And without even cueing it, they're probably going to start improving that just because of the natural negative feedback they're getting from doing it incorrectly. And something that's maybe it's hard to say for sure, but I've just seen too many instances of this to not say there's not a correlation. So I'm going to kind of give my ideas of why I think this is the case. But people who tend to over retract on the bench press. So if you've watched my video on retraction, I don't say don't retract. I just say keep accountable. We lock our elbows and we retract from there. We don't allow extra retraction, at least at the start, by bending the elbows, because obviously that tricep attaches to the scapula. If that scapula pulls back, it's going to pull that tricep with it. Now, as we go through the movement, we want active retraction. And then as we press, we don't want to protract, but we're going to have those shoulder blades come around to an extent. So what I mean by the Larson kind of tends to help with that is I think there's something probably with the stability aspect. When we overly retract, maybe it's less contact with the bench, or maybe over retracting just causes less stability in some manner. I just find that Larson tends to keep people accountable from over retracting in regards to what I talked about in my over retraction video. And with that, I can't, like I said, there's a correlation I see here. I can't tell you how many people I've had that have had pec minor issues, which I believe stem from this over retraction, that do Larson and then probably a mixture of keeping accountable with the over retraction and the self-limiting goes away. And that tends to be a kind of a go-to for me when it comes to people with pec minor issues. We do a little bit more Larson benching because in big part, it is self-limiting. So we get to use a lighter load, and that's definitely going to help in regards to any injury. But I think there's some aspect to Larson where people naturally tend to not over-retract as much because you get punished for it. And the last two are a little less known. One is for equipment workaround issues. And this came around a lot with some of the shutdowns and some of the weird equipment that some of my lifters had to be on. If you ever had the bench on a really low bench, or maybe this is a commercial gym bench, for someone like me who has really long legs, it literally is almost painful to bench on like a 15-inch bench. A competition standard is around 17 to 17 and a half. If those real low benches that just kind of suck, with long legs, it's hard. Like I can't get into position. It's almost painful on my hips. So if someone has some kind of equipment issue where like it's really hard to be able to get a good competition bench set up and good position there, I might have someone Larson a little bit more. Not completely take away competition benching, but to take away the effects of this crappy bench, I might have someone do a little bit more Larson pressing so they're not affected by that every pressing session. And then lastly, the a lesser known thing, and I kind of alluded to it on tempo bench press, is if someone is having knee issues or knee tendinopathy, I'll go ahead and program a bit more Larson pressing. The fact is, when you're competition benching and you're using this constant leg drive style, or even really any type of leg drive, there is some pressure on that quadriceps. And you're literally doing an isometric leg extension and you're driving into the floor. And so I have actually had numerous lifters who we have found at the number one way we can get rid of their quad tendinopathy or knee pain is comp benching less. Like we can make adjustments to their squat. We can do all the things that, and it still doesn't go away. And then boom, we start doing a little bit more Larson benching and a little less competition bench pressing, and then it goes away. Now, I'm not saying that's the magic fix for anyone with knee pain, but I think that's underplayed in how often that is actually a part of it. The fact of the matter is I've kind of alluded to this in some other videos, is that an injury is pushing some kind of tissue past its capacity. And so we need to think about all the things we're doing with extending our quad. We're squatting, we're deadlifting to an extent. I mean, especially sumo deadlift plays a bit more into that, not as much conventional. And we're bench pressing. Bench press is definitely a part of that. And while it's a low fatigue aspect in relation to what squat is, it definitely is an aspect, and it's a bit more specific because there really isn't like, with a squat, there's more integration between that posterior chain and the hamstrings and glutes and stabilizing and kind of antagonistically against the knee. On the bench press, there isn't as much. We're more just extending that quad. So it's very direct onto that tendon and that muscle. So yeah, I've had very many instances where we've had to adjust competition bench frequency and do more Larson benching to be able to manage knee pain and seeing great success with it. All right, so how to correctly Larson bench press. The number one tip I'm gonna start with is make sure to set up like it's your normal bench press. And what I mean by that is too often people get onto the bench, they're already in Larson, they try and get in position, they unwrap, they just can't maintain that, they're kind of flat backed. So what's a better way to do it is be able to set up with our actual bench press and then bring our legs up. So what I mean by that is I'm gonna do everything like I normally would setting up. I'm gonna use my leg drive to really elevate my hips and get on my upper traps. I'm going to keep my hips up as I unwrap. I'm gonna set my butt down slowly. Then I'm gonna bring my legs up. Now, as I did that, I lost a little bit of my arch, but not much, because with a Larson, the goal really isn't, like some people say, oh, I'm gonna do Larson for a little bit more range of motion. Well, a little bit, it's not as much. And I'm actually gonna link a video down below from Matt Cronin. He did a great job of describing feet up versus Larson, because they're different. Feet up is feet on the bench. That is going to make you more flat back. Larson, not so much, especially because your legs hang down and they kind of pull you in this extension bias. So while it can decrease your arch and increase your range of motion a little bit, that's not the point. We're trying to mimic our normal setup as much as possible. So make sure to set up like it's your normal bench, then lift the legs up. Next up is that on a Larson press, I'll actively cue depression a little bit more. If you watch some of my other videos, I try and think more of leg drive and rib cage. Kind of helps to create depression. I don't like to cue it as much and really try to pull my shoulder blades under. I think if everything else is lined up correctly with your competition bench, depression takes care of itself. But with the Larson press, we don't have that leg drive to continue to hold ourselves in the same depressed state. So I will actively cue a little bit more, not a ton. I'm not trying to bring my middle of my back down to my butt, but just a little bit, I'm trying just to depress to keep that bar over my normal touch point a little bit more, like I would on my regular competition bench. Next up is on Larson, I like to have my legs hanging and off to the side of it. You'll see some people that will just have their legs kind of straight and like following the bench, and I almost argue that's almost kind of close to like in between a Larson and a feet up bench press. Like I said, the Larson and the feet up are different because of how it then affects our thoracic position. That leg straight is kind of in between. That could be a variation, but when I'm talking Larson, I'm allowing my legs to kind of hang slightly to the side. And actually what you can do, especially if you have a bench that's more unstable or you're really struggling with stability side to side, what you can actually do is not only have the legs hanging off to the side, you can actually then kind of actively squeeze the bench between your legs. Now, I'm not always telling people to do that. That is a circumstance where the bench is some type of equipment issue where you don't have a 17 to 17 and a half inch or 12 to 12 and a half inch width bench like a competition standard. Maybe it's a narrow bench and you're really struggling with stability. It's so much of an issue that like it's taking away from pressing. Well, maybe then we lightly squeeze the bench in between our thighs, and that can allow us to have a little bit more added stability by having something to kind of latch onto. And the last thing that I really make sure to cue on the Larson bench press, that I cue on every bench press, but maybe even more, it's more important on Larson, is really reaching the chest of the bar. So when we think reaching the chest of the bar, what we're really trying to do is continue to improve that rib cage flare and thoracic extension, but also that's cueing the retraction. We're trying to retract at that very bottom to kind of reach that end range of retraction before then pressing away. And so since we can't get that and the benefit from leg drive driving us up to the bar, we really have to be mindful to cue that. And in a sense, like I mentioned, we have to use our upper body now to accomplish that same task. That we want to do that too on a regular bench. It's just that on Larson, it's even more important because we don't have that ability to use leg drive to accomplish that task as well in congruence. So who would benefit from Larson pressing? The first one I have here is someone who really heavily relies on a leg drive to get the bar moving off their chest and kind of this propulsion off the chest with leg drive. This is going to take that away. You're going to have to just rely on truly just pectoral, tricep, and anterior deltoid strength to get that bar moving. And it's in a good way, it's going to help to kind of strengthen those pressing muscles, so we're not relying as much on technique or some kind of, I don't want to say cheating, but some type of form of kind of heave to move the bar. And now it's more just those upper body pressing muscles using brute strength and their own ability to get the bar moving in that manner. And the Larson is self-limiting. I said that's probably one of the biggest reasons I program it, in the sense of being able to be self-limiting. It's going to reduce average intensity. It's going to reduce, it's reduced the absolute intensity, while we can still push higher relative intensities because the weight on the bar is a little lower, it seems just to be a little less fatiguing and damaging, and people usually can tolerate more Larson benching than they can do competition benching. So in the sense of self-limiting, it's a great variation if we feel like we need that within a program. So, and that leads into kind of the next point I've kind of already alluded to, is if someone's experiencing some type of pec pain, maybe it's a pec major strain, it's a pec minor, any type of pec pain. I've just seen, like I said, this is, you can call this bro, or just this is coaching experience versus having some ability to give a very profound and detailed explanation why. I just found people with pec pain tend to be able to handle Larson benching better. And that very well has a lot to do probably with the self-limiting aspect, but I think, like I said, I think it has to do a little bit with people tend to not over-retract as much, because I think you get punished for the decreased stability when you start to over-retract on a Larson bench press. So if someone tends to dump the bar, they come down, they dump it, they collapse even though they're not wanting to. That's a movement fault. We're trying to maintain that thoracic extension and they want to. They're not trying to heave and sink. Larson's going to be great for that because, like I said, you don't have leg drive to kind of correct that fault. It's going to give you very negative immediate feedback to say that doesn't feel good or that was a lot harder when I did that. So people are going to naturally start to kind of fall into better movement patterns because of that. And with that, it a lot of times goes with kind of thinking about bar path and thinking about cueing as we go down. I very often combine Larson and tempo to really give someone the ability to really cue and think about what is their upper body doing. Because Larson has the benefit of taking out leg drive, so we can just focus on what is the upper body doing. And then tempo gives us that increased time to process cues. So if we kind of combine those two, that's a variation I really like because it allows us to really focus on what is the upper body doing, what are the elbows doing in relation to the bar, what is the hands and wrists doing, what is the thoracic position. All these things that kind of make up that kind of torso and pressing musculature. What is it doing in the bench and how we can control that best? And the last two kind of technique ones before some other more specialized ones is one, people who maybe struggle with lateral control. Maybe they get some from leg drive, but they don't do well of controlling with the obliques. I think the Larson is going to naturally force someone to do that a little bit more. And then also, as I kind of alluded to and I kind of showed the demonstration, is the people that have good leg drive until they hit that sticking point and they start to cheat it up and they start to lift their butt, change their torso angle to break past that sticking point, even though on all of the reps their leg drive looks good. So Larson's going to really punish, or not even allow it, I shouldn't say punish it, it's not going to allow you to do that, so it's going to force you to get strong in the manner that you're actually going to press, and you can't cheat those higher intensity reps. And the last two, less technique and more specialized, is one, if someone has a really low bench, like I kind of mentioned, if someone's got really crappy gym equipment, maybe it's home equipment, maybe they're at a commercial gym or a school gym, and the benches are just not going to allow them to be able to competition bench as frequently because of inadequate positioning or ability to get in that position, we might Larson a little bit more to kind of take that away and just worry about getting strong in the upper body. This kind of goes with equipment issues, but one thing is like if someone's got a home gym, they just don't have dumbbells, they don't have any machines, they have no way to do any kind of like upper body pressing other than bench pressing. It might be something where we do some Larson pressing as kind of as their accessory. We do some higher rep, maybe touch and go Larson bench pressing, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more when I get to close grip, because that's another variation I like, is Larson close grip in the aspect of kind of an accessory movement for kind of general hypertrophy purposes. But that's something I definitely I find myself sometimes programming Larson for, and who needs it is someone who maybe just doesn't have access to anything else. And so we need to find ways to be able to add just general hypertrophy movements. And it can either be Larson feet up or Larson or feet up, whatever may accomplish that task best, but having kind of use that as kind of in lieu of other accessory movements. And then lastly, like I said, if someone's experiencing knee pain, not just someone's experiencing knee pain, but we see that it's correlated to bench, because it may not be. It may have zero correlation to bench. So don't think I have knee pain, I got to change my bench press and I got to Larson more. It may have no correlation, but it's worth experimenting with. If you have been struggling with knee pain, you've done everything in the world to change your squat and do things and load manage and all this, and you're still experiencing pain, but you're comp benching 4 days a week, might be worth looking into and seeing if that has any correlation, and Larson benching more to kind of take away that quad extension isometrically from the leg drive and see if that kind of alleviates some of the knee pain. So who doesn't need this variation? Lifters who don't even know how to leg drive in the first place. So that is the foundation of the bench press. We know how to leg drive. And I'm not saying you need to be a master of leg drive, but you need to know how to do it. So I'm not going to say I won't program this for novices, but probably more so, I'll kind of explain this in a little bit, is that I kind of call this the intermediate variation. I probably program this a little less with novices, a little less with advanced lifters, but a lot more with intermediate lifters. And for novices, it's because they need to learn how to bench press, and we don't need to be worrying about too much about Larson pressing. So just like with most variations, as we get closer to meet, I'm probably going to do less Larson benching, and probably even more so when it comes to like tempo bench press. Probably more often I'm going to keep that all the way leading into meet for some people. Larson, depending on the person, we're probably going to need to take that out. Now there's some people fatigue management wise that I found we just need to lead that in all the way leading into the meet, maybe on like a tertiary day. But in the sense of like skill practice and like truly, I would argue getting as strong as possible leading into the meet, you're going to get strongest by competition benching the majority of the time. I think it would be a good time to pull Larson out, barring we need that for some other purpose, whether it's because of fatigue management or, like I mentioned, kind of the knee issues. And kind of going back to equipment issues, if your bench is really narrow, I'm talking really narrow, and that happens, and it's like dangerous to Larson bench press, don't do it. I've had some people send me a video before and they're on some bench, and I was like, okay, we need to take Larson away because it looks like you're gonna die. Like you're on a BOSU ball, you're gonna fall off at any time. This isn't going to be good. So make sure you, like, even though it can be a benefit when a bench is bad, that's more of kind of what I would say when a bench is too low. If a bench is too narrow and you can't get any side-to-side stability because of that bench, you're probably going to need to incorporate the legs. I also don't really use Larson pressing in the same way as tempo and like a max single. Like I can't think of anyone I've had max out on a Larson bench press. I don't really see much point in that. I definitely will push them heavy. I mean, we might do heavy doubles, heavy triples, but for the most part, I would say the majority of the rep range I'm programming in is like sets of 3 to 10. I'm not using this as like a high-end strength stimulus for singles. It's more of accomplishing other tasks kind of in between those rep ranges. So to wrap up Larson bench press, let's look at how and when I program it. So I've already kind of touched on this a little bit, but in general, I have reasons and times that I could program this at any point in the lifter's training, whether it's for general hypertrophy, whether it's in general strength blocks, whether it's even a peaking block for some general reason. I can really program it at any time, but I definitely say, just like most variations, as we get closer to meet, we're probably going to taper off of these variations to be more competition specific. I would say by far the most common time I'm programming Larson bench press is on like a tertiary day when we want this to be some type of way to be able to get a little bit more volume in but be less fatiguing because we know we got to come back around in a couple of days for a heavier bench workout. That is a very common time I'm going to be using the benefits of self-limiting and fatigue management with Larson. And as I mentioned, I kind of coined this as like my favorite variation for intermediate lifters. Beginners probably need a little bit more leg drive practice and skill practice with that. Advanced lifters probably just need more comp specificity because that's what's going to drive their strength. We're kind of in between with intermediates. I see a lot of benefit with Larson bench. And part of that is because one of the biggest ways I use that is for hypertrophy aspects. I find that in the sense of like when we're doing sets of 7 to 10 and whatnot, Larson's a little bit easier just to take to take out the thought as much when it comes to bench pressing or competition bench pressing, because just like a tempo bench press, even a regular competition bench press, when we're doing higher reps, we start to degrade on form. And it's a little easier not to degrade on form on Larson benching since there's less to think about. We really just got to make sure we manage that upper body position. So that's probably one of my heavy favorites when it comes to higher repetition work is doing Larson bench pressing to accomplish that task. I do program these for heavier work though, just not competition singles. I'm pretty sure I've never done that, but I definitely do see benefit in maybe programming a heavy double, triple, 4s or 5 in the sense of providing the strength stimulus and kind of pushing rep work in regards to kind of just focusing on the upper body. And again, maybe that's in relation because we're trying to manage fatigue in some way. Maybe we're just trying to take out the thought process of what leg drive is happening. We're just trying to focus on those pressing muscles. But neither way, we definitely can push these through a wide variety of rep ranges. I just probably wouldn't do them for heavy singles. And then based on kind of, I've already discussed some with the knee issues of kind of why I program Larson to kind of work around possible knee issues, but something you can also kind of take into account, even if it's not a big thing in regards to the competition benches causing any type of knee issue per se, it's still using your legs in some manner. So like maybe if I have a bench press day prior to my heaviest squat day though, and even though it just provides it's a slight little stimulus to the quadriceps, it's still there. Maybe I'm going to program Larson on that day to keep me a little bit fresher leading into my main squat day, and just arrange, and maybe that's the tertiary day on bench leading into the primary squat day, just to arrange things to manage fatigue best so that all 3 lifts can be the best within a week and not just throwing things in there, not realizing that they do affect the other lifts in some manner. And then lastly, Larson can definitely be stacked with other movements. And with the other two variations, the first one I mentioned, tempo bench press, and the one I'm about to get to, close grip bench press, that is a very common thing for me to stack those. I stack Larson with tempo to really work on that upper body control and bar path, and I like to stack Larson with close grip because of just the increased range of motion, and maybe we're biasing a little bit more towards hypertrophy work. Now, like I said, with Larson, it's not much increased range of motion, but if it's just a little bit, and if you're combining that with the closer grip work, it's definitely going to provide a different stimulus than your regular competition bench. So the final variation is close grip bench, and I'm actually going to go a little bit backwards here and start with how to do it, for the reason that I want to be able to give an idea of what I mean by close grip bench, because what I don't mean by close grip bench is bodybuilding. This super close grip, super tricep dominant bench press, close grip bench in relation to powerlifting, and what you're going to see a lot of different coaches programming is only about a 2 to 3 finger distance. So like for myself, I use the max width grip. So I am pointer finger on that knurling marker. For me, close grip is 3 fingers in. So that would be middle finger 1, ring finger 2, pinky finger 3. So my close grip would be pinky finger on the knurl marker. It's only a 3 finger distance. And the reason for that is we're not trying to program a completely different movement. We're trying to program a fairly close variant of our competition bench press. So trying to get too far away, if I'm going from max grip width to my hands on the smooth for close grip, maybe this could be an accessory or something, like a tricep accessory, but that is not going to have a great correlation to my general pressing strength in regards to my regular competition bench. So close grip bench is just going to be a slight variation in of 3 fingers. And also, with that being said, I could say close grip or wide grip, but the fact of the matter is 1, I tend to have more wider grip bench pressers, and then 2, if I do have some closer grip benchers, but I don't program as much wide grip work as I don't see as much benefit. So while I could kind of say just opposite grip work, I'm going to stick to close grip as I find myself programming that much more frequently than for a wide grip bencher to go a touch closer than I would for a close grip bencher to go a bit wider. So the only thing I forewarn is be prepared for the trolls, as you can see on Angelo Fortino's Instagram. If you say you're going close grip bench and it looks absolutely no different since it's only 3 fingers, you're going to get all the bodybuilders coming in and saying that it's not actually close grip bench. That's okay. It's for powerlifting. We're doing something completely different. So outside that little change, just 3 fingers in, there's nothing else different about a close grip bench press. Everything else is performed the exact same. So this is a very, very minor deviation. We don't need to change our technique from our competition bench press. It's just a slight little difference there. And so with that, working into why I like them, even though it's just a slight little difference, it does increase range of motion. Just slightly, but it does. And in regards to a lot of the styles of competition benching right now, it does lend benefit to increase our range of motion at times a little bit, because range of motion is very correlated to hypertrophy. And while hypertrophy and muscle size in general has a very great correlation to strength, lower body and upper body, I'd almost argue it makes more correlation with the upper body, even though I don't know if there's research studies proving that, for the reason that biomechanically, not only 1, more muscle mass equals the higher ceiling and potential of that muscle to produce force and strength, but 2, we tend to get a more direct effect on our actual leverages. When our quads grow, it doesn't mean all of a sudden our squat dramatically changes. When our pecs grow, it kind of does. It changes range of motion. So there is definitely a hypertrophy benefit, or benefit to having hypertrophy specific work for the upper body to improve those leverages, to improve muscle size for that higher ceiling and potential. And I think closer grip accomplishes that a little bit more. There's also a little bit more of a increase of demand of the tricep. If we're going closer and we're increasing range of motion, that's going to increase the elbow flexion demands. We're going to have to flex our elbow a little bit more going down. And if we're thinking about the bench press, we have 3 primary movers: our pectorals, our triceps, and our anterior deltoids, with the big exclamation on pectorals and triceps. And there is very much benefit to training our triceps, and especially if we're doing this super wide bench and we're not going through much elbow flexion, we're mainly using our pecs in the sense of kind of what we're really stressing in that manner. It serves as benefit to do something else that's really going to, not to the extent of a bodybuilder close grip bench press, but just a little bit more by bringing that in to stress the triceps a little bit more, to be a little bit more specific of, okay, we not only need to increase our pec strength, but we also need to increase our tricep strength. And looking at more novice and intermediate lifters, I find that novice and intermediates a lot of times don't know what their strongest grip is. They either just pick a grip, or this is just what they've always done, or this is what their favorite lifter did. A lot of people I coach in kind of novice intermediate range really don't know what their strongest grip is. So I'm a big proponent of doing some opposite grip work, and that's where I think wide grip bench could be beneficial. Whereas like I said, I don't think wide grip is as beneficial, but in the sense of finding the strongest grip, opposite grip work, and in a sense close grip work is very beneficial just to try out different things. Like, let's see if you're truly in your strongest grip and be able to kind of go back and forth. It's similar to an extent to like the novice kind of trying conventional and then sumo deadlift to see which one's stronger. But I think with bench press, and I'll get this in a little bit more, there's probably a little bit more reason to continue to do opposite grip training and continue to do close grip, whereas with deadlift that's a little bit different. And then lastly, this is maybe a little bit of a bro reason, but I think closer grip just builds a little bit more basic strength. Like if you really wanted to get brute strong, you were a football player. A football player, you wouldn't have them set up like Sean Noriega on the bench press. Like that doesn't make sense in the sense of the sport demands. We need to go through a full range of motion and work through that. And so just a general base foundation of strength is good for most people. And this goes back to like a novice lifter. While we might be working on, or definitely could be working on technique and improving their arch and leg drive and all that stuff, they still just need a base of strength. They haven't really lifted much. They have a lot to gain when it comes to just general hypertrophy and strength. So having some closer grip work just to go through a greater range of motion and be a little bit more specific to just general purposes versus powerlifting specific is a good way to be able to have some variability within your training. And then lastly, and probably the most important reason, is if you do close grip work and you tag Chestnificent on Instagram, he reshares you and then he accepts you into the community of the close grip lords. So moving into who needs close grip bench press in the sense of this 3-finger in variation, the number one reason I'm programming this is to see just someone who doesn't know what grip is stronger. I think that is a very, very common thing with most bench pressers in the novice to intermediate range. They really don't know what grip is stronger. And sometimes that takes a while. It's not like all of a sudden, okay, I know this one's stronger because I can lift more right now. You have to kind of develop both to an extent. And the good thing is, at least with bench press, wide grip and close grip, and like if you're naturally wide grip and you're gonna do a closer grip bench, there's still gonna be some carryover effect from that. And I'm actually gonna get into that a little bit more with kind of how I program this. I've definitely seen some correlation where sometimes people's close grip really helps increase their wide grip strength, and some people's wide grip strength really helps to increase their close grip strength. And that goes a lot back to kind of what I mentioned with kind of the muscular demands of wider grip being a little more pectoral dominant and closer grip being a little bit more tricep dominant. The next person that could benefit from close grip work is someone who's maybe focusing a little bit more on hypertrophy, whether that's a novice because they just need to get bigger, or maybe this is a hypertrophy focused block in the sense of the annual training plan of what you're trying to accomplish in a certain period is just trying to work a little bit more on muscle size and gain, because range of motion has been very strongly correlated with hypertrophy. So doing a slightly closer grip bench to increase that range of motion, and maybe combining that with a Larson press or a feet up bench press to truly increase range of motion can definitely be a good way to accomplish that task. And then looking at novices again, because I'm going to kind of keep mentioning novices, is that this is going to be something I'm not very well probably going to program them for just a general baseline of strength. To be able to kind of just get generally strong pressing and not over rely on technique, which kind of leads to the next one, is if someone overly relies on being technical on the bench press to boost strength. And I wouldn't call them brute strong. They're just very technical. And that could very well kind of correlate to being a very high arch bencher. That closer grip is going to just kind of help with kind of increasing range of motion a little bit more and just challenging them through a different position. You can kind of almost look at it to an extent. I wouldn't say this is verbatim, but like deficit deadlifts slightly increase range of motion. Closer grip slightly increases range of motion. And so then when we go back to that regular grip, it almost, in a sense, I almost call it potentiation effect, but it's almost like if you put a donut on a baseball bat and you take it off, the bat feels lighter. If you go for a longer range of motion and you go to a shorter range of motion, you're gonna notice that shorter range of motion a little bit more, almost kind of like this ability to feel like I don't want to call it fake strength, but feel like you're stronger there because you can feel that cut range of motion because you're used to this longer range of motion from that closer grip. So when not to use this variation though? So as I mentioned, I said one of the biggest reasons is finding out which grip is stronger. Once you find that, very well, you may stick with that unless we're also programming closer grip for some of the other reasons. But especially as you're getting closer to meet. As you're getting closer to meet, it's not time to experiment which is stronger anymore. Decide which one is stronger and then run with that for the specificity purpose leading all the way into the meet for those last block or two. This is a little less common, but some people just have a little bit more pain if they do a closer grip, and that could be technical. That could be something that could easily be fixed with some kind of technique or positioning, or there could be some other reason. But I definitely had some people who say there's just a little more aches and pains when they do closer grip. Maybe it's some type of shoulder or whatever it may be. That also can go wider as well. There's definitely both ways. So you may be choosing your grip width based off of kind of what feels most comfortable and what's most sustainable. But if you're a wider grip bencher and close grip is a variation and close grip causes pain, well, that's probably not the best thing to choose. Let's choose something that doesn't cause pain. I've mentioned multiple times, novice and intermediates I think are very good candidates for a close grip bench work. For my advanced lifters, not as much. I find with my advanced lifters, much like any of these variations, especially on bench press, this applies a little bit on squat and deadlift, but applies definitely, I feel like, a lot more, is that when I have more advanced lifters, they just need to comp bench press more. I just think that is an advanced thing where they just need more specificity, and that might come a little bit not only to the specificity, but also just the average intensity is going to go up since we're not self-limiting. We're just always pushing those higher intensities, and maybe that's just what they need, and it's less about the variation and more about the average intensity rising from competition bench. And then lastly, who I want to use this with is if you're a flat back bencher. If you're a flat back bencher, you've already got a lot of range of motion. And usually with that too, people who are flat back benching or don't really go much towards ours, they usually tend to bias more towards a closer grip, because most of those flat back benchers tend to be a little more tricep dominant, as that seems to be a little more comfortable with that full range of motion and kind of where the sticking point is, because the sticking point usually is going to be lower the wider you are, and it's going to be higher the closer you are. So if we're looking about close grip bench pressing and we're flat back and we want to get all the way up here, that's mainly tricep strength to extend to that lockout. So you just find that flat back benchers tend to bias towards close grip, but even if they don't, I don't know if it would benefit them much, because a lot of the things I said won't apply to them because that range of motion is already there. So looking at how to program this, it can really be programmed any way your wider grip can. Because like I said, a lot of times I'm programming this in regards to being able to figure out, is the close grip stronger? So we might do heavy singles. We might do regular general strength work in the 3 to 6 rep range. We might do higher rep work. And that's going to lead more to, in the sense of like using this as kind of more of a hypertrophy benefit due to the range of motion. But if we do know that wider grip is stronger and closer grip is just a variant, then maybe I'm not going to push singles. Maybe then we're going to stick more in kind of like 3 to 10 rep range and know that it's going to build maybe some general baseline of strength, and also using that for hypertrophy. So it really just depends on what it's being used for. Is it being used if you're figuring out which grip is stronger, or is it being used as a supplement for the other benefits that I've talked about? And as I've already kind of mentioned when I talk about Larson, and even during close grip, a variation I really like in regards to kind of when we're focusing on hypertrophy is a Larson close grip bench press, because we're kind of doubling up on the sense of just really trying to increase range of motion, increase specificity, just worrying about those pressing muscles. Let's be very specific in our intention of just using those pressing muscles to their fullest to be able to build muscle size to then translate to hopefully increasing our ceiling and potential for strength. And then lastly, and kind of how I'm programming this, I would argue that it also needs to be specific in conjunction with your accessory movements. So let's take 2 different accessory movements. We've got dumbbell bench press and we've got weighted dips. Dumbbell bench press is a bit more targeted to the pectoral muscles. So let's say in a hypertrophy block, we are really pushing dumbbell bench press to really target the pecs. Well, it would make sense that we would supplement that on our main lifts of doing close grip work that's going to be just a little bit more tricep dominant. So we aren't just stacking the same thing over and over. We're being able to kind of attack both ends of it based on kind of how we're aligning our competition movements versus how we're aligning our accessory work. And then the opposite would be, if it's a hypertrophy block, I'm really pushing weighted dips. Weighted dips, even though obviously it's all these movements are going to use all these muscles. It's not like all of a sudden our pecs aren't being used, but weighted dips are a bit more tricep dominant than a dumbbell bench press. Well, maybe then I'm not going to stack up on double tricep priority there with also doing close grip bench. I'm going to keep my wide grip bench in to kind of be a little more pectoral dominant while I use those weighted dips to just build general base of strength and size, which the close grip could do, but I'm using weighted dips in this instance to be able to accomplish that. So I think also making sure we're making sense of the variation we're using with grip, with what accessory movements we're doing, makes a lot of sense so that we're accomplishing the goals we want. And maybe we do want to double stack it, or maybe we want to kind of stagger that so we're making sure to be able to target everything in one. So that wraps up my top 3 bench press variations. We've got tempo bench press, we've got Larson bench press, and we got close grip bench press. And those are the ones that I find myself definitely programming most often. And hopefully with really breaking down why I like them, how to do them correctly, who needs this, who doesn't need it, how I program them, how it helps to give you a little bit of a better idea of kind of how we can integrate this within a program. Because we want to be very selective and intentional with how we're choosing variations, not just doing them because our favorite lifter does them, or not just doing them because we think it has this one benefit, not realizing that there's other things that can accomplish that task, or maybe don't accomplish that task, that we can in a sense better choose and allocate those resources and training to. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, like it, subscribe, share it, let's spread the knowledge, and I'll talk to you all later.